Hi all, I'm Cullen Haynes and welcome to Lawyer Lending Live. In our Law Live earlier today, we talked to Melissa Barlas, and now we're talking to an absolute powerhouse in the realm of property. 11 years in the property industry, was a financial planner before that, and almost 12 with Binnari Property, the company he founded. Can you please make very welcome Mr. David Hancock. David, how are you, mon ami?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Cullen. Thanks. Great to join you today.
Oh, it's great to have you, my friend. And we were talking offline. The market's doing some very interesting things. What are you seeing on your side? What is happening in the Australian property market?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we always say is that there are many markets within Australia, so there's not just one market. However, pretty much across the board, the markets have lifted over the last kind of 12 months because fundamentally, Cullen, I think driven by a huge lack of supply, and the kind of signs around that aren't that it's not likely to kind of improve anytime soon in most of the markets. So we are starting to see prices head north, which I think does sort of surprise a lot of the speculators out there or the doomsdayers. But a lot of that is down to just the lack of supply.
And why is there a lack of supply? Is it because people are scared? They're wondering that they're going to have to sell in a down market. What is this lack of supply? What's the root cause of it?
Yeah, it's probably not one single thing. There are a number of factors at play. I would say one of the key factors is we've had interest rates increasing at probably the fastest rate ever. Now, what that means, as you would know, is that people's borrowing capacities have been impacted. So quite often when that happens, people's ability to move up to the next level isn't available. So if you're a homeowner, you've got your kids in the local schools and you know the option to upgrade is not there, you tend to sit tight. You don't tend to offload your home, you just sit tight. So there's fundamentally people aren't transacting. And then probably the other side of it as well is there's huge constraints at the moment on the construction industry. That's fundamentally sort of kicked off during COVID and it hasn't really improved greatly. So we've had real challenges around, material costs and supply of materials, but probably the biggest one is also labor. So getting access to trades, especially with a lot of the infrastructure projects that have been going on around the country, it's just been an extremely competitive market. And so projects, brand new projects are taking substantially longer than they traditionally have. And then you've also got to add on to that, we've had record levels of migration since COVID, since we opened our doors. So I think, from March to March, if you like, so March 2022 to March 2023, we have 560,000 migrants, which was well above what they were anticipating when they opened the borders. So we're at record levels of migration. So you factor all those sort of things into play. We've just got extremely low levels of supply. In fact, historic low levels of supply.
And is when someone says, "Hey, I'm going to wait for the bottom," would you say that the bottom has already passed?
I think so. Yeah, unfortunately, I think so. Different markets have their own, quirks. So Sydney will behave different to Byron Bay or Brisbane or so forth. So there may be certain markets out there that may experience a bit more pain. But I think a lot of the major markets around the country, that did dip, and not all of them did, but say Sydney and Melbourne, I think the signs are that certainly that the capital growth in those markets and that, if you look month on month, they seem to be increasing. And I think that's just because people are starting to get their kind of act together and getting used to where interest rates are at. And as you know, Cullen, they don't tend to sit around forever. They do start to mobilize. And with the lack of supply out there and people starting to move on with their life, we're starting to see, prices increase.
Yeah, and I was going to talk to that. I put the title of our little Lawyer Lending Live episode is Now the Time. So I'd like to put it to you, David. Do you reckon now is the time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we get investors come through. Obviously, we deal and help people find investment properties. So we get investors come to us that just too nervous. So they prefer to wait until the market's done 20 or 30%, which sounds ridiculous, but it's just the way some people work. me, if I was investing, I would be really inclined to try and get into the market now and access a quality investment before the markets around the country really heat up and we're into our next property growth cycle. Because at that point, if you're an investor, you're going to be competing with a lot of local owner occupiers, and that's when you get ridiculous prices. So I'm always a believer, even if you buy into a market, like one of the real markets we're confident at the moment is say the Brisbane housing market. If you buy into that market and it's a little bit stagnant for sort of 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, if you're an investor buying for a 15 to 20 year hold, that's okay. What you don't want to do is wait 18 to 24 months and then write off 25% growth. So I certainly don't think you're going to go backwards, but I think now is definitely a time to buy.
Good points, David. And I would suggest, if you are watching, it is now currently 3:42 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So if you have any questions for this powerhouse, put them in the comments. We're streaming live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And yeah, definitely put them in because we can answer them live. This is happening now. Rising interest rates. How do you think they've impacted, or if they've impacted, current purchases right now?
Look, I think from our perspective, we've seen a lot of investors come to us who want to buy an investment property, but they don't quite have the serviceability. So the fact that they were, what they could borrow at, say, 2% has changed enough, significantly changed at 6%. So it may mean they need to wait until their salary increases or rates fall before they're back into the zone where they can secure a really good investment property. But I'd probably ask you, Colin, what are you seeing out there at the moment with rising interest rates? Do you feel people are getting accustomed to where we sit at the moment? And what sort of activity are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, look, it was very refinance heavy before with the 12 interest rate rises and the fixed rate repayment cliff, which is well and truly underway. People coming off 1.89, 1.99. So the shock of that, I think, is definitely set in. But what I've also noticed, and I was talking about this with you offline, David, is that over the last 4 to 5 weeks, we've seen a shift as we've entered spring. And those that were sitting on their pre-approvals or not actually inquiring have now just turned on the lights. And now we've moved from a refinance market to a pre-approval and purchase market, which I think is very telling that, I don't know whether it's a shift in the weather or that fourth rate hold by the RBA and the first one from our new governor. I thought it was quite very, very interesting, but nonetheless, the volumes are speaking for themselves in terms of the level of pre-approvals and purchase inquiries that we're dealing with. And I highly recommend, if you're a legal professional or not a legal professional, get your pre-approval. It costs nothing. It's rather have it, not need it, and need it, not have it. And I'd like to ask you, David, does having your pre-approval give you the edge in the negotiations with both agents and vendors in your experience?
Yeah, I think anytime you can be ready to move quickly, your negotiating power is far greatly increased over someone that needs to get their stuff in order, because the seller of a property, they want confidence, because they generally want to be able to move on themselves, and if they know someone's ready to go and can sign a contract and move forward, even if you don't offer the best price, they may be willing to accept your offer, because they need to obviously do something themselves. They may be upgrading and they want to go to the next level. So as the market starts to heat up, time costs money. If the market does 10% over a quarter, which it can do sometimes, and you're sat there waiting for someone to get their pre-approval together, that's costing you money. So definitely, I think anyone who can get a pre-approval now, who's interested in buying the next 3 to 6 months, it's smart, because as the markets will heat up, it means you can take action quickly.
Good points you're making there, David. And I would ask if there are opportunities right now for potential investors in 2023 and beyond. Where are those opportunities, or where are you finding them at this minute?
Yeah, look, I think uniquely, we are at historic lows across the board, whether it be vacancy rates or listings. So there's no doubt we've already seen rents rise substantially in the last couple of years. That's going to continue, especially with all the migration that we just earlier spoke about. when we look at these things, we're looking at trends. And one of the real trends that's taking place at the moment, the Sydney median house price is approximately 1.1 million. Brisbane, as an example, is 760, I think it is. But what is kind of what probably needs to be factored in as well, when you're looking at areas like the lower North Shore or the eastern suburbs or the inner west, the median house price in these areas is way above the 1.1 million mark. So, when you've got sort of first-time investors or families that want to that have traditionally grown up in these areas, they don't tend to want to move to the greenfield sites that may exist out near, say, the new Western Sydney Airport and places like that. So they tend to then migrate to areas like a Brisbane or a Newcastle or somewhere where they can actually secure a good job, but where they can maybe remain close to the beach or near really good schools or whatever it might be. And I think the opportunity is in those kind of areas. So we're starting to see, say, migration out of sort of Sydney to areas like Brisbane, starting to peak to the levels we know that's going to really have an impact on the markets up there. And what that does is it means that as those markets traditionally naturally go through their own growth cycle, but couple that with all the interstate migration, we're going to start to see a lot of price pressure being put on those markets. So from an investment point of view, ideally, if we're going to invest, we want to invest in the markets where we think our investors are likely to achieve the best capital growth outcomes over the next 3 to 5 years. So I actually think that market offers some pretty good affordability right now, but that will change over the next couple of years.
Urgent insights you're making there, David. In terms of capital growth versus cash flow, what's your view on either both, one side, the other? What's your take on that?
Look, I think, coming from a financial planning background, I think that, most people are buying properties for capital growth. However, realistically, they need to take into account the cash flow characteristics. At Binnari, our probably median, if you like, cash flow gross rental yield is around the 4.5% mark. And we're finding that, our investors who are spending, say, $850,000 on a house and getting $750 a week rent, after tax deductions and so forth, even if they're borrowing all of the property costs associated, so deposit, stamp duty, and all the new property costs, they're depending on their tax rate, they can quite often not be breaking even after tax or even slightly positive. So, ideally, we can be buying a property that's going to be in an area that's going to get capital growth, which I think is probably the key element. But we do want the cash flow to be of such that it's not going to be hampering their day-to-day lives. So I think the two are really important. I think ultimately you want the capital growth. I have seen investors chase cash flow in the past at the sacrifice of capital growth. I don't think that makes sense. If you're making $5,000 a year, but the property doesn't move over a 10-year period, that makes no sense. But if you can get a property that's going to double over, say, a 7-year period, but fundamentally paying for itself through tax deductions and rent, then that's the ideal scenario, and that's what we look for.
Yeah, I'd like to dive deeper into and maybe unpack that a little bit, because a lot of clients ask us, do I do P&I and interest only? For those tax deductions and whatnot. What's your view on using interest only versus principal and interest, paying down the debt as a wealth strategy?
Yeah, there are a lot of factors at play, and one of the factors is the rates. If there's a differential rate between interest only and P&I, which there has been over the last few years. So there's also the element of their own situation. If they've got a home loan that's fully paid off, then they may opt for P&I. But if they don't have a home loan that's fully paid off, they might opt for interest only, because their investment debt is tax deductible, whereas the home loan debt isn't tax deductible. So there are a number of different factors at play. Traditionally, most investors have taken interest only because of that reason. So they've chosen, instead of paying capital off their investment properties, they've chosen to pay the capital off their home loans, which is non-tax deductible debt. But there has been, over the last few years, what I have noticed, Cullen, is some investors, even with home loans, have chosen to go principal and interest, because there has been quite a big disparity between the investment interest only rate and the investment principal and interest rate. So I really think it comes down to working with their mortgage broker and understanding the difference in the rates, and then kind of assessing it on that basis. It's not an absolute right or wrong answer, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And we get it all the time in terms of that question. Now, we're not financial planners, so we always direct them to their accountant and whatnot. But I would say that disparity is real sometimes with some banks. It could be 30 or 40 basis points. And it's a double whammy if if you're coming off one of the rates of yesteryear and you were on interest only. People get a rude shock. And a lot of people are in what's called, not a lot of people, but some people are in what's called mortgage prison, which means that you cannot technically service the debt that you have, not even anything new, because the rates have moved up. You're kind of locked into that bank, because if your income doesn't go up and your expenses don't go down, you don't service for what you have, and it's a very real thing. And the other side of the coin is the value of the property may have gone down, so you're locked in from an LVR perspective. So I would say definitely speak to your accountant and financial advisor to see what strategy is right for you, because if you are going on the fixed rates, who knows what's going to happen in future. But yeah, good points there. In terms of don't want to put you on the spot, but bit clickbaity to close us out, I guess your 3 top points for anyone getting into their first investment property or getting into the market. What are, I guess, 3 things that they should know, or 3 mistakes that you wish you'd known when you started yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I think firstly, one would be to assemble a property team. And by that, I mean, get clear on your strategy. That might be engage a financial planner, or speak to your accountant. Definitely get a pre-approval in place. Understand what your borrowing position looks like before you undertake, a closer look and start looking at purchasing properties. And then so put that property team, get a solicitor, all those things in play. Because that'll take a lot of the pain and guesswork out of it. Probably one of the biggest factors, really one of the core ethos for our business, is when investing, is to invest in properties that are fundamentally being purchased by local buyers, so what we call owner occupiers, not properties that are being bought predominantly by investors. So everywhere around the country we have, doesn't matter whether it's Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Newcastle, Sunshine Coast, there are going to be areas where there's a lot of type of properties that are being built for investors that aren't being bought by locals. I would steer clear of those properties and find properties that are in high demand and low supply environments and purchase those. And if you're buying a property in an area that has a lot of local owner occupiers, you're always going to buffer yourself in downturn, and in the upturn you'll always do better than areas that are saturated by investors. And the third thing, which may require a little bit of analysis, and if you don't have the ability to do that, maybe speak to a professional like us, but it's just understand the different market cycles. They don't all move as one. Sydney's been, and Melbourne, but Sydney particularly, been the best performing market over the last sort of 8 years. Prior to that, Brisbane was the best performing market in the previous cycle. So understanding what market is likely to be in a growth phase and most likely to lead the property market cycle. As an investor, I would say getting that research right would be probably the 3 key things.
Great points there. And where can people find you, David, in terms of where are you hanging out most? Where can people get in touch, mon ami?
Yeah, look, our website is pretty simple. It's www.binnari.com.au. My name is David Hancock. You can hook up with me on LinkedIn. But look, we often do education events, podcasts, webinars, etc., for anyone that's interested in understanding more about investing. Even if you don't use our services, which are actually free, but it's some great information in there for what potential investors should look for. And but yeah, if you're interested, please reach out. You can contact us via our website.
Fantastic. So be sure to do that. David, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Lawyer Lending Live show today, mon ami. Thank you so much for joining, my friend.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great and luxurious Wednesday.